Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. I'm joined today by Scott Cheney, who's the CEO of a company called Credential Engine. We're going to be talking about credentials and how they can power our future. Before we get into any of that, I want to welcome Scott to the program. Scott, welcome to Trending in Ed.
Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. It's great to have you. And then we always start by getting to know you a little bit better. Can you share with us your professional origin story?
Oh, wow. Where does it all start? I'm going to go back a ways, and I'm going to say it probably started soon after college. I was living in San Diego, and I got involved with running some adult literacy programs.
Nice.
And what I loved about that is that you had people come in who were in their 20s, 30s, 50s, who had never really mastered the ability to read.
Mm-hmm.
And if you talk to them, you realize they had so much to give, and yet were limited by this one hang up that prevented them from really engaging with all the information, all the people, all the opportunities around them. But you saw them being successful, and you just knew that with a little bit of help, they could overcome this one kind of problem, and the world was just at their feet. And so we actually were lucky. We got some funding from Dr. Seuss to help us with that work.
Nice.
Live.
Yeah.
And so,
the actual guy, did you got to know the actual Dr. Seuss?
So we got funding from him. I never met him, but we did get funding because he recognized that people needed to be able to use the information around them, and that came through literacy. So phenomenal start. Love the work. Launched me to where I'm at today, I guess.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then as a parent of a 6-year-old, that's why my spidey sense was activated when you started talking to Dr. Seuss. But literacy is one of those hidden skills at times where, folks try to pass as literate and they aren't necessarily excited about being measured. Again, as a parent, early education is very much about getting to those third grade, reading literacy milestones. But, your career and Credential Engine have sort of evolved beyond just literacy, which is probably the most critical of our adult skill set. Arguably, we'll see. Maybe there are others, but literacy is right up there. But it's bigger than that in that, a lot of folks similar to your example there have skills. They don't know how to translate them into credentials. And then employers on the other side similarly are, interested in going skills-based, but that's not as easy as it may sound. Can you talk a little more about the problem space that Credential Engine is in and its mission, vision, values, those kinds of things?
Yeah. So I kind of think about it as not dissimilar from that, literacy problem that I was working on back in San Diego many years ago.
Yeah.
But it's at a bigger scale, right? So what we were doing then was helping an individual be able to read an insurance policy or a children's book to their kids or something. But it was all about having the ability to make sense of information around them. So when you think about the work we're doing here now at Credential Engine, it's helping people access information about all of the opportunities around them to improve their own education, to get skills, to be more competitive in the marketplace. And it's hard to do, right? We've got nearly 1 million unique credentials that are available in the United States.
Right.
Just think about that for a second. That's a crazy number of opportunities. And yet it's also a really exciting number because we've got so much opportunity.
Yeah.
And those are offered by 60,000 or so different providers. So if you're trying to make sense of where should I go to get the skills I need from a quality provider that will get me a better chance of getting a job so I can actually advance myself, you're facing a really confusing marketplace. And so what we're doing is putting all of that information into a common format, a common language, so that anyone can access the information they need and be able to make sense of all of these options so that can more efficiently and effectively get to where they want to go, so
Mhm.
they can have success and be there for their families as we want them all to be, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other angle is, as a consultant, I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn. The other thing that's out there is almost like uncredentialed skills, where people just say they're good at something and maybe they get a few peers to kind of like recommend that they have that skill. And that seems like a pretty unstructured, kind of unfederated universe that is out there as well. So, can you kind of paint a broader picture, maybe, for like how people might think about their skills, and then where Credential Engine and the work that you're doing might help clarify things?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that. Let's step back for a second. What is a credential? So, first of all, we define a credential as everything from a high school diploma, an apprenticeship, a micro credential, a badge, a
Mhm.
certificate, a certification, all the way through every type and level of degree. So, including a PhD, it's a type of a credential, right?
Yep.
This is an occupational license. And then what really are those? Every one of those is just a different packaging of a
Mhm.
set of skills. A micro credential may have 3 skills. A PhD probably has several hundred, but
Right.
they're packaging of different sets of skills that make it easier to convey in the marketplace. And you don't
Yes.
want a PhD to come into an interview and say, here are my 200 skills and I'm going to read them off to you.
Right.
You want them to say, I have these skills and I'm telling you that by saying I've earned a PhD.
Right.
And so we do a really good job of giving people the ability to talk about the credential they have. We don't do as good a job about helping people talk about the skills that they have.
Hmm.
And for a lot of people, for instance, we know that there are 37 million adults in the United States who have some college but no degree,
Right.
no credential that they can easily point to say, this is what I've done. This is
Yeah.
what I know.
Hmm.
So what we need to do is a better job of helping them be able to say, I took these classes. I did get these skills. Here's
Yeah.
my value in the marketplace, without being able to say I have this credential. And that's okay. They still have the skills, and we want to make sure they get value from what they've put in and what they've earned, even though the community college or the university didn't say it was enough for a credential, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard it described as both a skills articulation problem, like people can't put language to the skills that they have. And then it's also frequently a translation problem where something is understood as one thing in one context. And then when you try to translate it to another context, there's some kind of breakdown or like kind of friction in how people understand that stuff. You're very much about interoperability of these
Mhm.
things too, and like the underlying sort of skills frameworks that are necessary so that people can kind of translate the work that they did in a job into the work they might have done at a community college, into the work that they might have done in an internship. Can you talk about that aspect of your universe?
Yeah. So, interoperability, fancy word, but it basically means that if I at Ivy Tech or the University of New Hampshire say that I have taught this skill as part of this course in this program,
Mhm.
and this skill is defined as X,
Mm.
that if someone at IBM wants to look at that skill and say, what does it mean? The interoperability just says that what Ivy Tech says it means is understood at IBM to be what Ivy Tech said it means.
Just to jump in real quick, my other word choice, it was either interoperability or plumbing. And I didn't want to force us down the plumbing. You don't
Plumbing
always
is
see
good.
forced down the plumbing lane. I didn't know where, if you wanted to go there.
I am good with infrastructure. I'm good with wiring. I'm good with
Yeah,
plumbing. We can talk about
sure.
any aspect of architecture you want.
Pneumatic
It's all
tubes,
true.
even. Yeah, I'm with you.
I'm not sure about pneumatic tubes. Those are phased out, but everyone still needs plumbing and
Yeah,
everybody still needs electrical, right? And you want
fair,
to make
fair
sure
point.
that you
Yeah,
flip the switch over here, it
yeah,
turns the light on over there, right?
yeah.
So all interoperability means is that if you say it's A here, and IBM beats it, it's still A.
Yeah.
Now, IBM may have needed a B, but they at least know what you meant when you said A, right?
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
interoperability.
Yeah.
It's truth being conveyed through that electrical circuit.
Right. And part of what you're doing at Credential Engine, as I understand it, is trying to almost establish the standards and the approach that sort of allows for that connectivity, for that wiring to kind of connect the dots for employers and then also for folks who are helping the workforce and actually for employees themselves.
There are so many different entry points to this, right? If you're talking about what a skill means, Ivy Tech may issue a credential and they define a skill in the finance field, but the American Banking Association may say that you need to have skill X. And
Yep.
Ivy Tech is similar to, but maybe not exactly the same, or maybe it is exactly the same.
Right.
And JP Morgan Chase wants to know that you're actually following the American banking, guidelines. So
Right.
what we're doing is not replacing the American Banking Association. We're simply taking the information from Ivy Tech, American Banking, JP Morgan, publishing it all so it's in a visible format.
Yep.
And so, look, here's the analogy I always use for people. We know that there are countless hotels and restaurants and airlines, other players in the travel industry. We also know that there are services like AAA that will rate hotels and Photors that will rate restaurants. All of that information is in Expedia and Travelocity because they all agree to use a common language. We're doing the same thing here. We're getting all of the provider information. We're getting the accreditors information. We're getting the state labor market information to say, here are the outcomes of those things. And
Yep.
we're working to get the employer information so that this entire ecosystem is
Right.
seen in a common language. So
Right.
we can build better tools to help students figure out what's best for them.
Yeah, and this is where transparency is a big part of your focus here too, is like it's not
Absolutely.
just articulation, but it's like let's make it transparent so that everyone can kind of like see what's going on and you can't really succeed with something until you can measure it is one thing that, some folks believe and I think that's probably true in this case. And then as an ex-Kaplan guy, I love me some initialisms. There's a C TD. I forgot the acronym now. So
Oh, you had it. You had it.
TDL.
CTDL.
It's called the Credential Transparency Description Language. And it does for this field what a comparable language does for Waze and Apple Maps and Google Maps, right? It basically says, hey, that's a one-way street. There's a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit, and there's a stop sign at the end of it, right?
Mhm.
It's describing all of that. And
Yep.
we're doing the same thing. That's a university, that's a course, that's a skill, that's
Yep.
a pathway, that's an outcome.
Right.
All of this, we're putting it into the CTDL, which is an open source language anyone can use and everyone can benefit from.
Yep. Exactly. And then you're a nonprofit, and then there's also an advocacy component. And then you work with companies to kind of like help them with skills transformation and understanding this type of stuff. Can you kind of paint that picture, like just shape up the nature of your professional work?
Yeah. So when we started, right, we were a 3-person nonprofit back in, 8 years ago. And, here we are setting out to try and transform the workforce and K-12 and higher education data markets. So
Yeah.
it was a bit of a daunting task, right?
Yeah.
And we knew that this was possible only if we got a large number of those actors in the field, the institutions, the higher ed, the state agencies,
Right.
recognize the value to play along and to adopt this.
Yeah.
We also knew that we needed to work on getting the SIS vendors and the catalog vendors and the pathway and navigation tools that sit on the desks in front of students. They had to be a part of this because ultimately they're the ones who are going to be the front facing service to a student or
Yeah.
a job seeker.
It's an ecosystem play.
It is a big ecosystem play that included, to your point, the advocacy piece, right?
Mhm.
Because you want markets to adopt And you need markets to find value in this, but markets are fickle. And so we also have been focused a lot on betting in policy that this is really the best way we need to move forward. So we've had 6 states put in place either explicit language in law or very, very helpful language in their law. We've had more states put it into regulatory or guidance in their states. And then we've got some real strong interest in Congress around reauthorization or enacting some new things that are going to say, no, students, think about this. We make it easier in this country for someone to hop on Expedia and get all the information they need about booking a trip to Hawaii.
Right.
We make it easier for people to plug in, I need to drive across town, and Waze will tell me if there's an accident on the Beltway, I need to navigate around.
Yep.
We make it easier to jump on to cars.com than we do to help a student navigate their way through this morass of opportunities.
Yeah.
Best credential so they can get a good job to afford that vacation. Right.
Right.
So what policymakers are beginning to understand is that's not okay. And we need to make sure that we change how we support students with better data that's open so they can make better decisions.
Yeah. Makes sense to me. It's interesting, working with folks across the whole education universe. Workforce is the place where I think there's some opportunity around, bipartisan concepts and stuff that actually like helps with workforce, transparency and fluidity, the ability to kind of like find an opportunity and fill it with a human and a job. Seems like the policy, it's hard to push policy in any context. And I know state, local, federal is all, that's why you're doing the work that you're doing. But it does seem like there's some upside to a more flexible and fluid system. And in part, that's because, and I waited this long to bring it up, we haven't talked about artificial intelligence yet. And we haven't talked about the nature of work and the disruptions that we're seeing there. Again, on potentially the bipartisan side, even the current administration is talking about an AI education policy that's tied to apprenticeships. Like, it does feel like there's some common ground that can be found around all this stuff. How are you thinking about moving as fast as the disruption is happening? In some ways, it seems like having the standards and the approach that you're talking about might position you well for the types of disruptions we're seeing. But what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, I want to go back before I answer the AI question. And I want to go back and just talk about the bipartisan opportunities around this. So we're currently working in 30 plus states, pretty evenly divided between red states and blue states. We have conversations going on with both sides of the aisle in Congress, both the House and the Senate, who absolutely agree that transparency, better information in the hands of people is the right thing to do, whether it's workforce, whether it's higher ed, whether it's K-12, whether it's apprenticeships. And the context we're in, is something going to move around higher ed in Congress? Highly unlikely.
Yeah.
But when something moves, I do believe that there will be transparency aspects to anything that moves because people recognize this isn't just a workforce issue.
Yeah.
We need to be helping students in the 7th, 8th, 10th grades be able to see better information about navigating where they're going. And so I'm really confident that we are such a bipartisan. No one has ever said to me, Scott, that's a bad idea for students in K-12, or that's a bad idea. So I'm actually very optimistic in the general about this. Now, AI.
Oh, by the way, we're recording this on May 7th, which is, I believe it's the 23rd anniversary of Allen Iverson's famous practice press conference. But yeah, we're talking about AI.
I also expect to be invited back for that conversation about Allen Iverson.
Yeah, next May 7th.
Okay. So AI, here's one of the things that really worries me. So we're doing a ton of work in utilizing AI to make mapping this ecosystem faster, easier, more efficient. It's so big. that
Yeah.
just sending a few people off to do it by hand is not realistic. So AI
Yeah.
is going to be a big help there.
Hmm.
The thing about AI that worries me the most is that we're beginning to see, and it's going to just pick up pace. We're seeing AI driven tools that are being used to purportedly help students and job seekers and others make sense of the marketplace and help them make better decisions.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm opposed at all to AI being deployed that way. It's
Yeah.
that I don't think AI has access to the best information possible yet to be
Yes.
able to do its job to its greatest effect.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we're really focused on is saying to the institutions and the policymakers and the parents, you have got to step up to make sure that information about who's teaching what's the quality of it, what's
Mm.
the outcome of it, what's the connection to jobs, that information has to be available as trusted, verifiable, structured data.
Yeah.
And then AI can use it to best help a student. And
Yeah.
just randomly pulling information from the internet about what's out there,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
garbage in, garbage out.
For sure. That's where I've been calling this Clippy's revenge, where like I feel like we're in this age of like AI slop that is powering bad data, the garbage you're talking about, that is powering chatbots that are in some cases become the equivalent of banner ads in the 90s, where like you just kind of want to swat them up. They're like gnats. It's like, I don't want to talk to a chatbot right now. Those will get better. And, like it or not, I think the better ones will probably be paid for either by big companies or
Yeah.
by individuals who can't afford them. So it's something to pay attention to. Also, I think users are going to increasingly expect that sort of interface of a chatbot as opposed to maybe a search box, so that's probably going to be something that we're
Yeah.
dealing with for the foreseeable future. But in terms of the future, where do you see, I guess, maybe negative scenarios and then some positive scenarios in terms of where this stuff goes? Maybe put a little fear of God in us around like, if the skills revolution and the stuff you're advocating for doesn't happen, what's the risk there? And then potentially what the upside is if we do it right.
So let me start with the upside. I'm really excited about the idea that we can have highly personalized, mass customized pathway tools on the phones of every individual out there. Once we have verified, trusted information about all of the different parts of the ecosystem, there's no reason that we can't say to Mike when he's ready for a career change, we know what you've earned. We
Mhm.
know what your interests are. We know
Mhm.
what's available around you, whether it's the community college down the street or ASU across country
Right.
or London School of Economics, right? We
Right.
know that those are all out there. Let's customize for you and give you 5 options. You can decide, I want to do this in 2 years
Yeah.
expensively, or I want to do it in 5 years inexpensively.
Right.
We can do that. And AI is going to be a major driver of interpreting all of the options out there and giving you some choices of pathways.
Yeah.
That I think is really exciting because we don't do that right now for students. We just
Yeah.
leave a bit of over there is your option and you have to
Yeah.
figure it out yourself. What scares me is that I go back to a lot of this information until it is verified and trustworthy.
Mhm.
People are going to have all sorts of AI driven deepish fakes about themselves.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of predatory marketing trying to use AI to drive people in certain directions in the guise
Yep.
of trust us, this is vetted. It's not, right? I mean, people are people, tendencies are tendencies, and people will use predatory practices to try and enrich themselves on
Yeah.
the backs of people. AI has the chance to fix that and to put power back into people's hands on good, trustworthy data.
Yeah.
It also has the chance to just make bad practice even more prevalent and
Yeah.
probably harder to ferret out. I am generally optimistic about this.
Mm.
Everything I read is that AI itself is better able to self correct bad data. I hope that's true. I don't think we've seen that in large scale practice in the public yet. I think that's still in models that
Yeah.
are being used inside companies.
Hmm.
But I'm generally optimistic about what the future holds for helping people find the best ways to improve themselves.
Yeah. I think the risk is more short term on a lot of this stuff, like the
Yeah.
vision and the advocacy that you're talking about. It by 2030, one way or another, it seems like this progress will continue, and like the work you're doing is meaningful because it should create the infrastructure that can actually power a better way of thinking about job pathways and skill development, workforce development. But it's more in that interim that I think the challenges are really going to be probably more difficult, I guess, where, right now when I go to LinkedIn and when I have friends who are looking for jobs, there's just so many applicants. Many of them are AI powered. And then on the hiring side, a lot of them are using AI to like do those initial screenings. And that's also where folks are getting a little bit predatory, I guess, around, or even just building weak features into platforms like LinkedIn. And I'm a LinkedIn advocate, but I don't want to give them a free
Yeah.
ride, because it does feel like the messiness and the risk will probably create some cautionary tales, I guess, in the near term.
I've had people at SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, tell me that there's great desire on their part and on a lot of companies' parts to move to skills-based hiring.
Yeah.
But in this interim, they're hearing from a lot of companies that they're backing off of that
Yeah.
because you can't verify those skills claims yet. And
Yeah.
so they're reverting to, but I can verify whether you got a degree at Purdue because I can check with
Right.
Purdue. I can't verify a claim about a skill from a random provider as easily. And I
Yeah.
don't trust that, this isn't just AI generated. And
Right.
so you're right, that interim piece, that this short-term moment we're in until we get the systems really good and in place, there's going to be a lot of confusion and people aren't going to be able to get the benefits up from it as much as we want them to.
Yeah. And we talked about AI. I'm a trend spotter who likes emerging technology. Blockchain is one that could actually come up in the credential space. I'd be curious how you think about that because it is a place where how you federate something and how there could be sort of a community of practice around that federation. What are your thoughts on credentials and the blockchain?
For our work, we have found that the cost and the effort of utilizing blockchain to simply make information about providers and programs and credentials and skills, which we want to be open and easily accessible, and isn't necessarily, it's not proprietary information for the most
Mhm.
part, right?
Mhm.
Some institutions will tell you that the actual syllabus taught by this professor in this course is proprietary. Okay, but the vast
Yes.
majority of information. So blockchain for us has not been a factor or a necessity.
Yep.
I do think when we start talking about learning and employment records or comprehensive learner records,
Yes.
where you're empowering someone to hold their own information in a secure way,
Yes.
some companies are going to utilize blockchain. I
Right.
know some companies in that space have said it's not necessary, it's overkill. I,
Hmm.
that we'll see how the market plays out on that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
for our space, information about that's Purdue, they offer these degrees, they
Yes.
offer these courses, that doesn't need to be blockchain. That is probably
Yeah.
just a necessary burden and cost that we can avoid.
I like it. I like it. That was a
Yeah.
good take. I appreciate that. And I sprung that one on you. You didn't know that one was coming. So good
All of
on
those
you.
blockchain advocates will get on the phone and tell me that I'm wrong, but I'm
Yeah.
going to stick to my guns here and say blockchain has a role to play, but not in this space.
Yeah. I cite Abraham Maslow probably more than I should, but it is sort of a hierarchy of needs thing in this context too, where if you don't have the underlying common data standards around what is a credential, how do we federate it with the current existing system, it's very difficult to kind of like create something completely different kind of out of nothing.
One place that I could possibly see it, although I still am skeptical, we're doing more and more work internationally.
Hmm.
And as we're helping other countries put their data into CTDL so that we can help with learner and worker mobility,
Yeah.
I can imagine that there'll be some instances where you want to have a little bit more security and trust and verifiability around some
Yeah.
countries credentials and claims.
Makes sense. Yep.
But again, in the most part, I think we're probably going to be able to do this work without blockchain, but we'll know as our footprint expands globally.
Yeah, just when you start thinking globally and further out in the time, who knows? I love the old quote, if you ask a futurist whether their prediction came true, their answer is either yes or not yet. So there is a sense of some stuff, maybe, wait for it, see if it'll happen. So we've covered a lot in this conversation. We talked about your background, starting with adult literacy and then landing in the credential space, credential transparency, CTDL. Is the name of the acronym that's out there. We'll include links to the work that Scott and team are doing in the show notes for the episode. As we wrap up here, Scott, is there anything we haven't hit on or any final thoughts you want to share with the audience as we wrap up?
I would ask everyone who's listening to do what you can to contribute to this work, right? If you're at an institution, talk to your registrar, your provost, your research department to figure out how you can make sure that what you're offering is accessible and that we're actually advancing this work. If you're a policymaker, go back and look at, are there guidelines, regulations, laws that we can tweak to make sure that we're actually doing everything we can to help individuals. This is not just this small organization. We're now 21 people, but we're still, tiny in this larger landscape. We need everybody. We need everyone to come and say, we do need to make this easier. If we need every person in the United States to be able to contribute their greatest and their best, we've got to figure out ways to help them get what they need and be able to put their skills to work. And that comes from this work. So happy to help everyone, have everyone contribute as best they can.
Amazing stuff here with Scott Cheney, the CEO of Credential Engine. We'll include links to what we talked about in the show notes for the episode. Scott, thanks again for joining me on the show.
Mike, thank you for the opportunity. It was a great pleasure talking to you today.
And for our listeners, if you like what you heard, subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.